Today's lesson is to be able to distinguish what type it is compared to all the other ones and then be able to factor them out. So, up to this point, we've done four types of factoring. And what I'd like you to do is pause the video right now and see if you can name the type of factoring that's shown with each one of these really quickly. All right, the first type of factoring is greatest common factor. And the reason I know that is that there is a number in common. The number in common is a 4, and this one also shares an a, so I can pull an a out, and I'm going to be left with a minus 2. The second type is difference of squares. So in this one, the fastest way to do that is to square root each one of these. So if I do that, I'm going to end up with 3a plus 5. And square roots have two answers, so it'll be 3a minus 5. The next one is basic or X factor. These are my names. They're not technically, it's just factoring, but they're the names I give them. So this one, what numbers multiply to 12 and add or subtract to 7? So the numbers that multiply to 12 are 4 and 3. To make it a negative 7, they both have to be negative. And then thinking through one more time, a negative times a negative makes a positive 12. The last type is probably the most challenging type. I call it complex. There isn't a name out there for it. I just use that one. We're always looking first, is there a greatest common factor we can pull out of all three? If I take a look at these three, there is no number that divides out of all of them. So that means I have to go back and factor. You can use Smiley, you can use factor by grouping, or you can use the more challenging X factor, whichever method is the best for you. So if I take a look at this one, I'm going to start 6 is, I'm just going to go 3 and 2, and 15, I'm just going to go 5 and 3. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm just putting down the multiples of those, and I'm going to check it using Smiley. So I get 9 and 10. Well, that worked out perfect the first time. I didn't plan for it that way, but it did. So if I have a negative 9 plus a negative 10, I make negative 19. And just like the last one, that means both of these have to be a negative. And there we go. So you're going to have to be able to distinguish what type it is and then work through and factor them. The other thing that you're going to have to do today is find the answers. So we're going to walk through what are the answers for each one. So the first one, the answers for this one are what make each part 0. So the first part, what times 4 is 0? So it has to be 0 for the first answer. And then the second one, what minus 2 is 0 is 2. Remember, the shortcut is the opposite of this number. The next one, this one's a little bit harder. You make this equal to 0, and I would subtract 5 and divide by 3. So my answer for the first one is negative 5/3. The second one is going to be exactly the same, but a positive 5/3. So difference of squares, both answers will be the same, but one's plus and one's minus. That comes back to this concept of a square root. The next one, basic, what makes each part 0? So the first one would have to be a positive 4, and the second one would be a positive 3. The last one, we have to go back to the same thing we did for difference of squares. What makes each part 0? So I would add the 5 and divide off the 3. So for the first one, my answer is 5/3. For the second one, I'd add 3 and divide by 2. So that one is 3/2. So you're going to have to go through all of this process to solve these today. These are a little bit more challenging because you got to figure out which type and what direction you're going. But you guys done a great job to this point. So I think you'll do great today too.